Hi guys, today I just wanted to do a bit of a deeper breakdown specifically for Narja when it comes to her partner, and more specifically the role that Narja's partner specifically plays. Now again, to be clear, Narja is not a limited character, and neither in this case I'm assuming is her partner, but I just wanted to go over some of the value, or specifically why I think you may or may not want to pull for Gaya, and more specifically why I think you may end up wanting to build Narja as a defense stacker, and then again why I guess in general you may find difficulty doing this if you don't end up using someone like Gaya. Now again, to be clear, it definitely feels like there isn't a, outside of her specific her specific signature or her main partner here, it doesn't feel like there are an insane amount of like perfect defense specific scaling or defense specific partners that you can use here. Now again, you do have things like Yvonne and you do have things like Alyssa, but whether or not you really want to use some of these effects is kind of up for debate. However, the reality is that we do also have access to some of the more OP controller, I guess, like battle pass effects in the form of something like this Nyx card, or rather the Nyx partner card. And again, though this doesn't give you defense specifically, it does read that when the first, or rather when the assigned combatant draws for the first time each turn using an ability, you will have 8% damage dealt by, or 8% increased damage dealt by allies for one turn. Now, this doesn't sound insane, and I would admit that whether or not you can even really find the time or the ability to use drawing through an ability for every single Narja turn, whether or not that's even possible, pretty debatable. However, increasing the amount that you heal and also increasing the health of Narja, especially if you're not using her so much for mealtime, I think is a solid or still has solid value. But inevitably, or ultimately, the reason why a lot of people use something like Nyx is for the ego skill effect, which allows you to discard up to 3 cards, then draw 1+ cards equal to the amount of the number of cards that you discard. Now, again, it should go without saying that something like Nyx is definitely going to feel way more impactful when you have a bunch of trash cards, or if you have worse off cards in something like in the Zero system. But the reality is that whether or not you really find the value in throwing away 3 cards to pull up 4 more, this is something that's kind of dependent again on the team, what sort of lineup that you're running, or what the purpose of your fight is. Now again, I will say though that despite a lot of players likely suggesting to stack defense in order to of course deal more damage or things of this nature, the reality is that, as I mentioned earlier, when it came to Narja's damage in the form of mealtime, though it does deal a crazy amount of damage across, well, I mean total damage, especially if you're able to stack it on through whatever means, whether that's dealing a bunch of, or using a bunch of homing lasers from Serenial, or through some other means. The reality is that again, whether or not this added defense percent, or whether or not the mealtime that you are left with at the very end is actually super impactful, is pretty debatable at this point. Because again, if you are using something like 12 homing lasers, what happened? Like, what are you fighting that 12 homing lasers is not sufficient enough to blow up? And in that case, it doesn't feel necessarily as though you'll need to stack defense percent so much. Now again, the reason why I bring that up specifically is because if you then decide to, again, use Narja specifically more for her supportive capabilities, this is maybe somewhere, or the sort of situation where something like Gaya isn't so necessary specifically, as again, you may find deeper value in, again, trying to do something like take a utility or a utility-based ego skill. And though I did say that Narja, or rather Gaya specifically as the partner card here, does still offer pretty good value in its ego skill, as it allows you to specifically draw 1 attack card, allows you also in a lot of cases to affect or manipulate the veracity on field, and all of that is without affecting or costing any AP whatsoever. Now, despite this, or while all of this is happening, it is also pretty fair to say that unless if you're using something like Alyssa, or unless if you're using one of these other 5-star cards prior, it doesn't necessarily feel great in general to invest in some of these defense cards, as again, this is one of the only characters that are probably popular enough or more common enough to be used, such that you'd justify leveling up a whole separate partner themselves for this case. And otherwise, again, I could definitely see the argument of people using, again, something like the Nyx card instead, to varied or even technically worse, but still savable and quote unquote free to play value, or to free to play success. Now, again, I do also want to point out that in terms of the value behind something like Gaya, I admittedly do not have this at the highest level, and though I did try investing in obviously getting higher defense, putting on a decent set of gear for Narja, and even in this case, I think that her damage through a set like this is probably on the higher end, especially with what you're seeing from some of the damage subs that I have on her. Despite all this, I definitely felt like her direct damage value is still less than most of the other characters that I ended up pairing Narja with. This really did, by the way, include even pairings or even characters that I used, including again, the Serennials of the world, or even some of the other characters, including when I tried using her alongside Renoa, when I tried using her alongside Mei Lin, or even characters like Tressa. Side note, rest in peace to Tressa, you will be missed as per the new tower. In any case though, even with like some of my lineups that included Yuki, it felt like genuinely, though I was able to in some cases just throw away my entire deck and just play towards this end game of letting Narja do the most damage, the reality is that whether or not you're really going to be focusing on that aspect of Narja in terms of her damage is really what I felt what dictated whether or not I would really need or want to use or pull for something like Gaya. With this, again, I can show you as many situations or scenarios or setups where yes, something like Gaya will make you do more damage, but at the end of the day, I also felt specifically that investing in someone like Gaya didn't really feel that valuable for me if I wasn't super in love with Narja as a DPS. Otherwise, again, and especially since at this point we've now had a few rotations of the battle pass, I found that being able to use something like Nyx was also its own sort of value, or had its own sort of value. And otherwise, again, though it was nice to have damage increases to the team, a lot of the characters that I was already using either have some sort of gimmick mechanic where they do a lot of their damage through something like a debuff, again, like Tressa, or in the case of someone like Serennial, they're one-shotting everything anyway. And the main difference doesn't come so much from this added 20% damage here, and rather whether or not I was lucky enough to get something like a 4 homing laser or a 3 homing laser with the perfect shining core, or whether or not I was able to find a Yuki that was also, able to RNG and get one of like the Forbidden Ecstasy cards at the exact same time. In any case though, guys, from what I've tested and from what I've seen specifically for Narja, I definitely wouldn't freak out too much about not having Gaya, and especially since a lot of the lower cost cards in the game, especially in that 3 or rather in the 4-star range, do sometimes have value. It doesn't really feel as though this is necessarily a card or a partner that I would recommend pulling for, especially if you're on a budget. Ultimately though, of course, if you do get this card, or rather if you do get this partner, you will deal more damage. I just don't necessarily know if this is something that if I were to go back and time and try to pull for, or deliberate on whether or not I should pull for Gaya or not, this is not necessarily a card that I think I would pull for again, though again, I do think that her and her art is pretty cool, which I don't know, there's something to say about that, honestly. And again, to be clear, does add value. I do find a decent amount of damage gained from this, but whether or not this is worth, for me specifically, by the way, going entirely to pity, completely debatable value. Anyways, that was just a bit more of a breakdown specifically on partners for Narja. I didn't want to make the other video on Narja like 40 minutes, and that's about how long I think it would have been if I had added this section in. But in any case, I apologize again. A lot of my day one thoughts are definitely more rambly, but as I explore more, test more, I'll try to keep this video and the comment section of this video more updated and answer anything that I can. But yeah, thanks again for watching though, guys. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.